Rarer than spotting Bigfoot. Seeing the three-run homer. Hi everyone, this is Will O'Toole welcoming you to another edition of Park Ridge Sports History. This week, I don't know whether I opened a can of worms or just opened my big fat mouth and really don't know what I'm talking about, which is a possibility. But as you recall last week, I did an entire show on the likelihood of the Yankees winning the World Series, the pennant, winning a playoff spot, and even getting into the playoffs. And I said last week, just based on their previous 27 World Series championships, that the likelihood that this particular team doing all of those things is unlikely. And I used facts and science and data that I compiled based on their runs scored average against the league, their runs prevention average against the league, etc. Well, I did mention last week that I was going through, I just always recall the old adage by Earl Weaver, who always used to say pitching, defense, and three-run home runs. And as a matter of fact, I didn't realize this. I just saw it as I was really compiling this show today, that there's actually a book about that. And of course, anybody who's been watching this show and been tortured for the last 60 some odd episode knows that I had spent quite a bit of time in the early episodes talking about those Oriole teams from the late 60s, early 70s that were led by Earl Weaver. Now, I do love Earl Weaver, although I never rooted for an Oriole team, but I did admire him. And there were certain players on that team that I did like quite a bit. Mike Cuellar, Boog Powell, Frank Robinson, of course. And how can I not like Earl Weaver, to say the least, and of course, Brooks Robinson. Anyway, he got me thinking, and this is all anecdotal, but I have been very frustrated. I think many, probably old fans of baseball have become really upset and frustrated with the wiffle ball mentality that we're seeing in baseball today of the strikeout, the walk, and the home run as being everything and anything regarding the offensive teams. Well, I started taking a look, and of course, this is all unscientific. This is really anecdotal, but I don't know whether I'm onto something or this is just has always been part of the game. But as my cartoon actually stated, I originally said, wow, what's rarer than seeing the Bigfoot? And that is the three-run home run. And I was using the adage or recalling the adage of Earl Weaver with the three-run home run. Well, I just didn't realize how. And I took three particular ball players, didn't realize how rare the three-run home run actually is. But it does bring up, I think, without a doubt, that the solo home run has really, I think, increased in the way that baseball is played today as opposed to 50, 60 years ago. And I'd like to just use a couple of things. Now, as I said, this is without a doubt unscientific. I think I have to do obviously more research and collect more data. But going back to 1930, and I only used the National League, I was looking at, and this is what I did. I took all the home run hitters from 1930 on. Now, I don't have them listed, but I think many baseball fans realize who I'm talking about. The Willie Mays, the Ralph Kiners, the Johnny Benches, the Barry Bondses, the Mike Schmidts, the Hank Aarons, of course, the Ernie Banks. These are all great all-time players. For the most part, they're all Hall of Famers and all the rest of it. And I was just looking at this. I started applying Earl Weaver's one home run for every 3 RBIs. And as a kid, I used to do it that way as well. So if a guy had 33 home runs, I naturally assumed he should drive in 99 RBIs. If he had fewer than that, let's say he had 33 home runs and let's say 80 RBIs, I was thinking, wow, he's not really driving in quite as many RBIs as you're hoping with the home run, since the home run is such a valuable instrument of offense. Obviously, you score a run. And this let me just preface this. I am not denigrating any of the great home run hitters, nor am I poo-pooing their achievements as being home run leaders. But what I am starting to see is that the frequency of that, or actually that the ratio of 1 to 3 has actually declined in the last 20 years in baseball. And here's what I mean. From 1930 until 1940, now, of course, I didn't go back farther than that because 2 reasons. One, it was the dead ball era, and I actually thought it might taint it. You know, you had some guys who actually led the league with 11 home runs and drove in 100 RBIs. So 11 times 3 is 33. So you can see that, yes, their home runs were driving in quite more, or the ratio was quite higher. What I was trying to do is get it into present day terms. So I started with 1930. It is probably the era of the greatest offense in baseball history, even with the advent of the DH, even with the added extra games, and with the propensity now for almost every lineup not to have 1 or 2 home run hitters, but to have about 4 or 5. All right. But from 1930 to 1940, the home run leaders 11 times, and that includes, co-leaders like Chuck Klein in 1932 with, I believe, I'm going to leave that alone. But put it this way. Hack Wilson in 1930 hit 56 home runs. He drove in, of course, the unbelievable, I still believe, that's the major league mark of 191. I know that baseball historians have gone back and said, no, he really drove in 190, but I'm listing what Baseball Reference had, 191. So he had 56 home runs. Multiply the 56 by 3, and you get 168. So here's what I'm looking at. I subtracted the 168 from the total number of RBIs, and I got him as a plus 23, meaning, real quick, that for every home run he was hitting, his ratio of 1 home run per 3 RBIs is into what Earl Weaver was talking about, pitching, defense, and the 3-run home run. Because in Weaver's eyes, if he got the pitching and the defense, and he was always counting outs, not innings and not runs allowed necessarily, but how many outs I was getting, because he needed 27 to win. But he always reasoned that if he could get 3-run home runs, and the normal game that he was playing, even at the time, the average was, let's say, 4.2. Well, he was 75% of the way through. Somehow, some way, he believed he could scratch across that other run. All right. League average, boom. All right. So back then in the day, Hack Wilson is probably 56 homers, 191 RBIs. So he's a plus 23 on the ratio scale. Well, I noticed that from 1930 all the way up, ready for this, up until 1946, the NL at least, the ratio, all right, was holding true. Almost as if Weaver knew more in his clipped fingernail than I would ever do in my 215-pound body. But almost lays in agreement, or the theory's holding true with what Weaver is saying, and that is that you got your big home run hitter. His job was, if runners get on base, his job was to knock home them all with a 3-run home run. So if you get runners first and second and third, first and third, obviously bang them home. Well, ready for this, from 1930 all the way to 1946, there wasn't a time when any of the home run hitters didn't have a ratio of 1 to 3 and or better than that, with the big guy being Ralph Kiner, because Ralph Kiner basically was a home run hitter of the 1950s, and he really dominated, even though he played for some terrible, terrible Pittsburgh Pirate teams. And of course, Branch Rickey ultimately didn't give him raises. And Kiner said, yeah, but last year I led the league again in home runs. And Branch Rickey, not known to be light of heart, with the wallet and giving out raises and stuff, said, well, we could have finished last with or without you. And ultimately, Ralph Kiner would be traded. But I do remember this. I went to a book signing with Kiner over at Yogi Berra Museum, and I did ask him about it. Now, he really didn't want to get into it, but there's no question that he and Ricky did not see eye to eye. And Ricky, of course, is probably one of the most significant administrators, at the very least, in baseball history, if not arguably one of the key figures in baseball history. And I would put Marvin Miller, and I would argue it might even be Curt Flood and Babe Ruth. I've always said, well, and I almost at the hip, Ricky with Jackie Robinson. But I would actually say if there was a Mount Rushmore of significant historical figures, it would have to be Ricky and Robinson, Ruth, and maybe Marvin Miller. Maybe not so much Curt Flood, even though Flood did open, no pun intended, the floodgates to free agency, even though he lost his case and all the rest of it. But Marvin Miller was the one who really exercised all that through. I know Peter Seitz with McNally and Messersmith was the one who really opened up the floodgates. But you have to think about the catalysts or the initiators. And you could argue those are the four most significant people in baseball history: Ruth, Ricky, Robinson, and Marvin Miller. Anyway, I noticed, though, that 1-for-3 ratio really holds true for National League home run hitters. Now, twofold. I didn't do the American League. One is they had the DH from 1973. I was using that as my little loophole. The other reason is I wasn't doing an entire song. I just wanted to see how anecdotally true Weaver's admission on his philosophy of baseball is, the 3-run homer. From the 30s to the 40s, it kind of carries with the home run hitters, that they were hitting home runs with a 3 RBI ratio. The reason I say that, after that, and you could probably attribute this to the 1960s and kind of a renewed dead ball hitting decade of the 1960s, where pitching probably really did catch up with the major league hitters. And there was, without a doubt, kind of a lull in offense during the 60s, which is why, quote unquote, after 1968, the year of the pitcher, they lowered the pitching mound. They kind of contracted the strikeout zone. 1969, you saw with the expansion, obviously a plethora of home runs by both leagues and all the rest of it. But even in 1969, Willie McCovey. Now, here's what I'm saying. From 1949 up until 1960, there was only 2 instances where that 1-per-3 ratio existed. So you kind of see a lull in this, or Weaver's prescribed idea of 1-to-3 kind of take a hit. And you have some big bashers. I mean, you have Mays and Aaron, you have Banks in all those years. Now, I don't know, in a lot of ways, as I'm compiling this and I'm thinking about the 1-to-3, I'm not really sure not so much discovered or what I'm onto, but I do notice it goes from almost double digits, significant numbers of RBIs by the home run hitters. I mean, just bashing in runs and leading the league at a 1-to-3 ratio, to all of a sudden a contraction of that. And all of a sudden it seems that the level goes down, that it goes from a high of about 61 in 1937 with Ducky Medwick. He had 31 homers and 154 RBIs. So he's a plus 61, all the way down to a minus 28 in 1956. Okay? Offhand, I'm going to look that up right now. 1956, I think the home run hitting leader with 43 home runs and 100 RBIs. Let me just take a quick look. Well, I'll come back to it. But you're talking about 1950. I'm even thinking it might have been someone like Duke Snyder. Anyway, 1956, you have a minus 28. All right. So the ratio is much lower. In fact, if you take the 43 times 3, you have 9, 129. But it was a minus 28, meaning that with 43 home runs under the Weaver ratio of 1 to 3, the leading home run hitter should have had 129 RBIs. He only drove in 101. And this kind of gets back to the essence of what I was saying. Of when I was a kid, if I saw a guy with 40 home runs and he only drove in 80 RBIs, I was thinking, wow, his home runs weren't really being used to the fullest. All right. But again, here's the deal. From 61 all the way up to 1979, all right, it only occurred 5 times. And I can tell you this, Johnny Bench, 1970, had 45 home runs, 148 RBIs. He had a plus 23. All right. Willie Mays in 1965, and maybe this is really an example of how baseball, the offense really did take a lull. Willie Mays banged out 52 home runs in 1965 and only drove in 112 RBIs. Now we go on, and almost from 1980 all the way up to 1999, it's about the same as it was during the 70s. 1, 2, 3, 4, about 4 times did the Weaver 1 to 3 home run 3 RBI ratio take into effect with any of the leaders. And I believe one was Mike Schmidt. I believe it was Mike Schmidt in 87, 37 homers, 111 RBIs. Times the 3, you're talking about 111. He's actually even. He's perfect. All right. He's at 1 to 3. Okay. But here's the deal. From 2000 all the way up to present day, it has only occurred 3 times. All right. 3 times has the leader, all right, in home runs had a 1 to 3 ratio in home runs and RBIs. Now, I'm going to take 3 guys. I already mentioned Ralph Kiner. I'm going to take 3 individuals. I'm going to take Ralph Kiner, and I think it's only fair to say I'm going to take one of Earl Weaver's big bangers from the 1969, 70, and 71 season, Boog Powell. And I'm going to take Aaron Judge, who probably is symbolic of today's slugger. A lot of walks, a lot of strikeouts, has the ability to hit 50 home runs. And that's why I took them. Well, here's the deal. I was going through their home runs and RBIs. And I also took Ralph Kiner. I took one season, 1947 for Ralph Kiner. I took the 1969 season for Boog Powell. And I took the 2017 season when Aaron Judge led the league in home runs with 52 bombs. And I just did a listing of the home runs. I just wanted to see how many of them were solo, how many of them were 2-run home runs, how many of them were grand slams, and obviously how many were actually 3-run home runs. Well, I got to be honest with you. When I did this cartoon, I had the idea or the intent of showing one thing, and as it is, it's almost really truthful about this. The 3-run home run is really a rare bird. Even going back with Ralph Kiner, it is really obviously. I figured out, and I totaled up all the home runs of the 3 guys that I'm using. Now listen, they're from different eras, different generations. The game played differently under different circumstances and environments. For Judge, probably the most draining, you could argue today. Why? More cities to go and travel to, more ballparks to become acclimated to. more and different pitchers that you're seeing from year to year. Obviously, an expansion from 154 games to 162, something that Kiner didn't have to deal with. Boog Powell in 1969, yes, there was 2 additional teams being brought into their leagues. The leagues were divided, or the American League and the National League were divided into a West and East division. In many respects, Boog had to travel less than Aaron Judge does today, even though there were more teams at the time than there was when Ralph Kiner was playing ball. And Ralph Kiner, of course, was playing with just the advent of black players being introduced into the league. That's number one. Plus, you were still playing primarily day games. And I think many ball players today will tell you definitely that there is a huge difference between playing a day game and a night game. In fact, I would say this. I would conjecture that many ball players would probably like to play more day games than night games. Why? It fits more into really the way that humans are, are acclimated to the environment. It's very difficult to work the night. It's very difficult to work the grave shift. And I think statistics and science will prove that out. Playing during the day, it's more like a regular lifestyle. So I think that Ralph Kiner might have had those advantages. Now, he didn't have the advantage of, let's say, 8 more games. Maybe that was an advantage, fewer games. Kiner's season ended in September, not into October. It began in, let's say, the first week in April. All right. Maybe a little bit warmer weather. All right. I think today's players, yes, they're traveling in a number of time zones. For the most part, Kiner did not have to go to the West Coast all that much. Yes, they were traveling by train. Today's players travel by plane, sometimes by bus, just like old players. But I would probably argue today that just the travel, and put it this way, we all know that when we travel, when you come home from traveling, you are beat. You need a couple of days just to unwind, just from the stress of traveling, meeting the deadline of getting on board a plane, going through, it seems like the interminable boarding protocol. So it is, all these are factors. There's no question. All right. And I realize that. But as I said, I was looking at this, and I think what I'm trying to find in these 3 players that I am using as quote unquote examples. And I wasn't really, I don't know if I was really looking to prove a theory about the 3-run home run, or seeing whether Weaver was, obviously true on that, or really what I was discovering is, wow, the solo home run is a big factor. And this, again, is not a knock about getting a home run. Hey, listen, you get a run any which way you can. Solo home runs win games too. 1-0 games. All right. 3-run home runs win games. But let's just take the 3 players that we're discussing. Ralph Kiner, big-time home run hitter. He does make the Hall of Fame 1975, basically on his last chance ditch effort. I'm going to tell you this. As I was just researching this 1947 Kiner season, Kiner was a really good player. Now, is he on the level of Ted Williams? Probably not. But I've always admired, and I am prejudiced when I say this, listening to Kiner, I always knew he had great baseball sense. He knew the game inside and out. Maybe he didn't have the 5 tools that some of the great players, obviously Mays. I mean, nobody's going to mistake Ralph Kiner for Willie Mays. And I don't even think Ralph Kiner would feel that way. And yes, you could say that Ralph Kiner might have been a great, can you imagine if Ralph Kiner and Branch Rickey were together, not with the Pittsburgh Pirates, but with the great Brooklyn Dodgers of the 50s? How different would his career be? how different would their relationship be? Or if Kiner played with the St. Louis Cardinals, and really he was playing for Pirate teams that were just at best mediocre. Was he valuable to the team? Well, I think so. And I think he was a little bit more valuable and more important than Branch Rickey gives him credit for. But I also think this. I think Kiner is a great player, a Hall of Famer, obviously not considered an elite of the Hall of Famers. And I think if you're following baseball, you know that's what I always argue about with these writers who will not go to the 100%. And that is, I think most baseball fans know that Lou Brock's a Hall of Famer, but he's not Willie Mays or Hank Aaron. I think that is reserved for the Ted Williams, Willie Mays, the upper echelon, the Geurigs, the Ruths, the Maggios, the Mantles. People know. But was Kiner good enough to make the Hall of Fame? He had some remarkable seasons. And maybe had he been able to hang on, and maybe play for some really good teams as, let's say, a substitute player, part-timer and stuff, maybe if his prime of his career wasn't spent with a mediocre club that couldn't get out of its way, maybe the gods of baseball should have been nicer to Ralph Kiner. But, he was a good ball player. And I'll tell you what, I don't think he was one of these guys who made mistakes. I think he just played the game and knew. And I'll give you a perfect example. His first home run in 1947 was a grand slam. And he actually had 3 grand slams in 1947, the most of any of the players here. In fact, when I go to Boog Powell, Boog doesn't even have a grand slam in 1969, and he totaled 37. Now, why do I say that? And look, here's another thing. In 1947, the Pirates finished 6th in the league, but they finished 7th overall in runs averaged. They actually averaged 4.6. The league averaged 4.8. So right away, they're percentage points below the league average. Kiner had 26 solo home runs, and obviously 23 with multiple players on base. Now, there were 2, and I'm using Baseball Reference, there were 2 instances where he had multiple RBIs and home runs, but I couldn't get a box score for it. So I actually threw those out. All right? So I didn't even count them. If you want, I'll count them as solo home runs, and he got RBIs another way. So basically, 49% of his home runs, he had 23 multiple home runs, guys, and 26 solo shots, I do believe. All right? Yeah, 26 of, let's say, the 54, about half. All right? He does hit 3 grand slams, all the rest of it. Okay? The interesting thing is, when I was going through this, he does have 3 really cool box scores, and these are just aside. He actually went 0 for 2 in one game, actually scored 3 runs on 3 walks, which is kind of incredible because obviously I don't think anyone ever thought of Ralph Kiner as being a speedster, but he had to be a pretty decent base runner, and there is a difference. You got a blazing speed and not be a good base runner. Being a good base runner and getting to the next base and maybe even advancing about it takes a skill. And that is, hey, can you judge a fly ball that's going to drop in for a base hit and maybe get that extra base that other players would only kind of be tepid about and only advance to the one base? So Ralph Kiner actually went 0 for 2 in a game on July 23rd, 1949 against the Braves. They won the game 12-9. He goes 0 for 2, had 3 walks and 3 runs scored. Not bad, all right? And then there's another game, ready for this? He actually went 0 for 1 had 3 walks and 2 runs scored. So once again, with 5 walks, he scored 5 runs and went 0 for 3 in 2 contests. And then the last one of these 3 multiple walk games, he went 1 for 1 in a win against the Cubs, 9-6 on 7/10/1949, July 10th, 1949. He had 3 walks and 3 runs against the Chicago Cubs, and they beat the Cubbies 9-6. So you're talking about a guy, listen, he drew 9 walks, and scored 8 runs with the 9 walks, and only got 1 hit and 6 at-bats. That's pretty remarkable. And that's what I'm saying. And this is why I enjoy doing the research, because everyone assumes, all right, Ralph Kiner, 369 home runs. He's in the Hall of Fame for his home runs. We all know that he was kind of a cusp Hall of Famer, got in through basically like the Veterans Committee on his last shot, 1975. But I think those are 3 box scores that indicate that Ralph was more than just a slugger. When I say a slugger, a home run hitter, he was a good ball player. One of the best ever from New Mexico, anyway. And here was his thing, all right? He does have 26 solo shots, but he had a combination of 3 grand slams and 5 3-run homers, and he had 13 2-run blasts. Now, I guess another question I have to ask is this. Does he have so many solo blasts because the Pirates are such a poor offensive team and nobody can get on base? And he did have quite a few home runs. And of course, I wish I had done a little bit more study on this. He does have quite a few home runs in their wins. With the 52 home runs, I'm almost guaranteeing you that 50% of them had to be in Pirate wins. I know that Pirate team, mediocre at best, came within 4 games, but it was late in probably around July, of getting to 500, and then they would fall apart. Ralph played a good number of the games. There was only one kind of lull where I think he missed about 4 or 5 games in a row. Maybe it was injury, maybe he was sick, I'm not too sure. But basically, you could pencil in Kiner every day. And he either hit in the number 3 or number 4 spot for the Pirates. Meaning, okay, here's another thing. Theoretically, you're actually giving up maybe potentially 1 at-bat per game where you're not going to have the bases loaded as the number 3 hitter, and that's the first inning, because the best you can do is the first, second. After that, and that's what many baseball metric people always say, is that really a manager and the lineup, it's kind of crazy. You know, it's serendipitous. It's by chance. The only time that a manager can really set his lineup the way that he wants it is really the first inning. After that, it is just mathematical probability and all the rest of it. So you could actually argue that Kiner lost how many at-bats or potentially how many RBIs by not hitting 4th, if by hitting 3rd with only 2 potential guys getting on base in front of him. Okay? That being said, he had 26 solo shots. Now, the argument can be made, is he not hitting them with runners on base? Or are runners not getting on base for him to hit them home or with home runs? Okay? I would say this, that Ralph really impressed me. I think that most of his home runs, or almost half of his home runs, were with runners on base, which isn't too bad. Now, we get the Boog Powell. This happened to be the biggest surprise. And the reason why I say that, Boog was an MVP in 1970. I did not use that. I used the year that he hit the most home runs just to try to give it more credibility, the research. Number 1. Number 2 is I didn't want his, quote unquote, his best season, even though statistically speaking, really 69 was a greater season for him. He lost the MVP to Killebrew that year. Killebrew hit 49 bangers. He had a great season too. Loved Killebrew, but Boog was 37 and 111 that year, and I think he wound up hitting 305. Now, the interesting thing, I did pick 1969 for two reasons. It was Earl's first full season with the Orioles. Now, remember, it was Hank Bauer who was their manager in 1969 when they swept the Dodgers with Frank Robinson winning the Triple Crown with 49 bangers, 316 batting average, and I think he drove in 122 RBIs. And that brings him five. Actually, that's a -5 on the 1-3. Now we get up to 1969, and here's why I picked him. And maybe later on I'll do Frank Robinson with Weaver, and I'll do probably the guy I should do more than anybody else. And Kenny Singleton, I should do, and the 1977 Rookie of the Year, Eddie Murray. I probably really should do him more because they were really together. He is probably the guy I am going to do, and I'll do a little bit more report on it. But I took Boog. Boog really got off. That Oriole team won 109 games in 69. They blew everybody out. Interestingly enough, they lost opening game. Boog got off to a very slow start. He doesn't hit his first home run, and it's a solo home run, till about the middle of May. And then he hits 2 solo shots. Of his first 9, though, here's the interesting thing. 5 are 2-run homers, and 4 are solo. Now, none are 3-run homers. And so you start to think about this. Is Weaver's idea really kind of overstated? Or should he have really said pitching defense and 2-run homers? And because I'm looking at, and here's the other thing that you have to, how much does the hitter in front of you play into this? For instance, there was a game later in the year where they went to extra innings. Boog Powell hits a home run, and Frank Robinson hit a home run. And I can't remember who was, I think Robinson hit in the 3rd slot and Boog was hitting 4th. So they hit back-to-back home runs, solo shots, big hits, big home runs. They both produce runs. And in extra innings, if you go up 2 runs, that's huge over 1, obviously. And you could probably argue that hitting those 2 solo shots was as important or maybe even more important than hitting a 3-run homer, because it does give you that cushion in extra innings. Anyway, of his 37 home runs, 19 were solo shots. And interestingly enough, Boog went down to 208, and it looks like Weaver gave him a day off. Right after that, over the next ensuing games, his batting average went up to 247. Well, anyway, and then kind of had another lull. Amazing. Weaver gave him another a day off, came back in as a pincher. His batting average actually zoomed to 312, and I think he ended the season at 300. In fact, I can get that for you right now. Boog probably hit, in 1969, he hit 304. The difference between Boog 1968 and 1969, 55 points in the batting average. All right. Boog went 22 and 85 in 1968. And yes, it was the year of the pitcher. He then went 37, 121, 304. His on-base percentage went up 45 points to 383. And interestingly enough, he drew 1 fewer walk in 1969 than 68. But in his MVP season, he drew 104 walks. His batting average was 297. His on-base percentage was 412. He had 3 great years for Earl Weaver there. And then, of course, he's traded to the Indians. But this 1969 season, over half of his home runs are solo blasts. And again, what does this say? I don't know. The Orioles were second in the league in runs averaged with 4.81. the league behind Minnesota. The league average was 4.09. Boog did not hit a grand slam. Maybe you can say it was because of Robinson in the lineup in front of him, Frank, taking away RBIs potentially. I don't know. But of course, Gehrig hit behind Ruth and had 23 career grand slams. But I'm not equating, again, Boog with Gehrig. Then the final guy, I just want to tell you this. We get to Aaron Judge. And of course, I've said it before, I think he's Frank Howard with speed. I know he's a better player than that. Probably of the three guys I've listed here, probably the best athlete of them all. But when he led the league in home runs, 28 of them were solo. 15 two-run home runs. He had 8 3-run blasts, and he had 1 grand slam against the Oakland A's, and I believe it was Andrew Trigg of the Oakland A's. That was his 16th home run of the year. But basically it's this. He just hit a ton of solo shots. However, ironically enough, home runs 42 and 43 came in the same game. They were both 3-run home runs against Baltimore on 9/14/2017. Now, I know I have a lot here to say about this. Probably the interesting thing about that 2017 Yankees, they averaged 5.3 runs per game. The league averaged 4.71. So the 3-run home run remains to be seen. Is it as important, or is it even more rare than even Earl Weaver realized? This is Will O'Toole of Park Ridge Sports History. Thank you again for joining me. Hope to see you soon. Thank you.